If this report were to be published in its own England, I would have to cross my fingers in a little forward explaining that all the characters were fictitious, which stern requirement of the British libel law would embarrass me slightly, because none of the characters is fictitious, and the story, told to Catherine Cornell by Clemence Dane, and by Catherine Cornell told to me, chronicles what, to the best of my knowledge and belief, actually befell a young English physician whom I shall call Alvin Barrack, because that does not happen to be his name. It is an account of a hitherto unreported adventure he had 2 years ago when he went down into Kent to visit an old friend, let us call him Ellery Cazalet, who spent most of his days on the links, and most of his nights wondering how he would ever pay the death duties on the collapsing family manor house, to which he had indignantly fallen heir. This house was a shabby little cousin to Compton Wynates, with roof tiles of Tudor red making it cosy in the noonday sun, and a hoarse bell which, from the clock tower, had been contemptuously scattering the hours like coins ever since Henry VIII was a rosy stripling. Within, Cazalet could afford only a doddering couple to fend for him, and the once sumptuous gardens did much as they pleased under the care of a single gardener. I think I must risk giving the gardener's real name, for none could I invent would have so appropriate a flavour. It was John Scripture, and he was assisted from time to time by an aged and lunatic father who, in his lucid intervals, would be let out from his captivity, under the eaves of the lodge, to putter amid the lewd toparian extravagances of the hedges. The doctor was to come down when he could, with a promise of some good golf, long nights of exquisite silence, and a ghost or two thrown in if his fancy ran that way. It was characteristic of his rather ponderous humour that, in writing to fix a day, he addressed Cazalet at the Creeps, Sevenoaks, Kent. When he arrived it was to find his host away from home and not due back until all hours. Barrack was to dine alone with a reproachful setter for a companion, and not wait up. His bedroom on the ground floor was beautifully panelled from footboard to ceiling, but some misguided housekeeper under the 4th George had fallen upon the lovely woodwork with a can of black varnish. The dowry brought by a Cazalet bride of the mauve decade had been invested in a few vintage bathrooms, and one of these had replaced a prayer closet that had once opened into this bedroom. There was only a candle to read by, but the light of a full moon came waveringly through the wind-stirred vines that half-curtained the mullioned windows. In this museum Barrack dropped off to sleep. He did not know how long he had slept when he found himself awake again, and conscious that something was astir in the room. It took him a moment to place the movement, but at last, in a patch of moonlight, he made out a hunched figure that seemed to be sitting with bent, engrossed head in the chair by the door. It was the hand, or rather the whole arm, that was moving, tracing a recurrent if irregular course in the air. At first the gesture was teasingly half familiar, and then Barrack recognized it as the one a woman makes when embroidering. There would be a hesitation as if the needle were being thrust through some taut, resistant material. And then, each time, the long, swift, sure pull of the thread. To the startled guest, this seemed the least menacing activity he had ever heard ascribed to a ghost. But just the same he had only one idea, and that was to get out of that room with all possible dispatch. His mind made a hasty reconnaissance. The door into the hall was out of the question, for madness lay that way. At least he would have to pass right by that weaving arm. Nor did he relish a blind plunge into the thorny shrubbery beneath his window, and a barefoot scamper across the frosty turf. Of course there was the bathroom, but that was small comfort if he could not get out of it by another door. In a spasm of concentration, he remembered that he had seen another door. Just at the moment of this realization, he heard the comfortingly actual sound of a car coming up the drive, and guessed that it was his host returning. In one magnificent movement he leapt to the floor, bounded into the bathroom, and bolted its door behind him. The floor of the room beyond was quilted with moonlight. Wading through that, he arrived breathless but unmolested in the corridor. Further along he could see the lamp left burning in the entrance hall, and hear the clatter of his host closing the front door. As Barrack came hurrying out of the darkness to greet him, Cazalet boomed his delight at such affability, and famished by his long, cold ride, proposed an immediate raid on the larder. The doctor, already sheepish at his recent panic, said nothing about it, and was all for food at once. With lighted candles held high, the foraging party descended on the offices, and mine host was decanting on the merits of cold roast beef, cheddar cheese, and milk as a light midnight snack, when he stumbled over a bundle on the floor. With a cheerful curse at the old goody of the kitchen, who was always leaving something about, he bent to see what it was this time, and let out a whistle of surprise. Then, by two candles held low, he and the doctor saw something they will not forget while they live. It was the body of the cook. Just the body. The head was gone. On the floor alongside lay a bloody cleaver. "Old Scripture, by God!" Cazalet cried out, and in a flash Barrack guessed. Still clutching a candle in one hand, he dragged his companion back through the interminable house to the room from which he had fled, motioning him to be silent, tiptoeing the final steps. That precaution was wasted, for a regiment could not have disturbed the rapt contentment of the ceremony still in progress within. The old lunatic had not left his seat by the door. Between his knees he still held the head of the woman he had killed. Scrupulously, happily, crooning at his work, he was plucking out the grey hairs, one by one.